Okay, welcome to the Under the King Seal podcast. I'm Thad King, and with me today is our history and symbolism expert, my dad, Keith King. Welcome, Dad.
Hello there, Thad.
So this podcast will explore the hidden secrets of history and how important symbolism is throughout history and how it runs through all of history. My role is to keep you on track today. I know you could talk for hours on all these subjects and go on lots of different tangents, so I'm going to keep you on track and get an insight into the things that you've seen over your 50 years of researching into these topics.
Well done. Let's see how it goes, eh?
So we're going to cover off these topics pretty briefly today, but we'll have follow-up podcasts on all of these different topics in more detail.
Well done.
So I'm going to call you Dad because it's easier for me. Feels weird calling you Keith. As long as I can remember, you've been interested in history. What got you interested into it all those years ago?
All happened 45 years ago when I wasn't feeling too good and I knew I'd have to have a couple of days off work. So what I did is I went to my local library looking for books, and a book came out at me which I wasn't really looking for. The book was entitled The 12th Planet by Zachariah Sitchin. This book talked about a planet that comes into our solar system every 3,600 years, which is a long time. And what it actually said, he said that on its trajectory around the sun, as it came closer to the Earth, visitors would leave this planet and come to Earth. And as it passed by the sun and went back on its return journey, the visitors would leave and go back to where they came from, wherever that was. But this happened every 3,600 years. Now, I didn't believe this at first. I'm thinking this is too much. So I started researching it, and I started going to different museums all over the world looking to see if it had any credibility. Well, all of a sudden the British Museum had the story, the French Museum, the Louvre had the story, and I found out that Germany and various other places all had these stories, and all because they had gone to the Middle East and stolen all of the works that were there and put them in their museums. And then someone's come along and written the stories about these museums and what was in them. And then one day the British Museum had a exhibition called the Rosetta Stone. Now, for people who don't know about the Rosetta Stone's famous for having 3 different languages on it. I'll do my own study, and I started travelling then. I bought myself a good video, and started filming all the things I could see in London which had merits, like Trafalgar Square, Cleopatra's Needles. And I realised then that someone has left a message for us. Who was that someone? That's the big question. Well, someone wants us to know. And then I found out who that someone is and basically said I need to join you and then find out what you know. We'll go there.
Okay. That brings me probably to my first memory of you actually exploring this in more detail. First memory was that you went over to the States. You wrote a book, The Cloud.
Yep.
And then you went over to the States and got that book and tried to turn it into a movie.
Yeah, this is something I had going for many, many years. I've actually read the Bible about 5 times back to front, but I didn't read it like a religious book. I read it to find out what the components in it that all mapped itself. And I'm going to say astrology, gold, a vehicle that seemed to come up and down with visitors in it, and it was called the Cloud. You don't have to take my word for it. Just look up in the Bible and there'll be 50, 60 mentions of a cloud, and people went into this cloud and went off this planet. I didn't put it there. I just tell you the verse where it is. And so I then discovered that there was 2 Ark of the Covenants, one here on Earth and one aboard this cloud. And I went, well, that's interesting. Maybe after watching Indiana Jones, which is what my film was
One
about.
of our favourite films together.
Always Indiana Jones. and Raiders of the Lost Ark, then I actually wrote a film script about Indiana Jones 20 years on. He's got a young daughter, but she's got leukemia. And there's no known medicine on the planet for leukemia. But hold on, doesn't the deity that we all look to have the tree of life and the tree of knowledge? Now, if I could get something off the tree of life, I could actually keep my daughter alive and cure the leukemia. But I've actually got to get to the deity first. That's where the Ark of the Covenant come in. I basically was studying hieroglyphics back then, and I realised that on the Ark of the Covenant was hieroglyphics, and the right hieroglyphics would get me to talk to the deity, and maybe I could go and see him, take my daughter with him, and cure her and come back. That was what my script was about. So
Sounds like a better one than the fourth Indiana Jones, I can tell you that.
The fourth one is basically Harrison Ford coming out of retirement and enjoying life. Well, he could have come out of retirement with my film. I took this script to America, to Los Angeles, with a friend of mine who just wanted to come for the journey. I wrote to George Lucas while I was there. I was in a hotel room there, so it gave me some credibility. I'm in a nice hotel. Dear George, would you like to take this script up and run with it as a next thing? And I basically give him a large portion of the script, and he said, I like your theory, but I'm off of Indiana Jones now. I'm doing Star Wars, so good luck, and off you go. And so, well, that was 35 years ago.
So basically your theory was that the Ark of the Covenant was a communications device to a higher being.
Yeah, it's having one here and one on the cloud always told me that we were talking to someone. And as we go on later, I'll tell you a little bit more about that, how we're talking to someone.
And would that explain, I guess, some of the technology that we're always talking about, that the pyramids are not
Yeah, what they
are, and that potentially not being able to be built by humans?
Yeah.
Did that sort of relay into where your theory went?
Just on that thing there, I started talking to all my friends about what I was, and some of them thought that I'm a little bit out there, but others went, oh, that's interesting. And one of my friends was travelling around South America, and he went to Guatemala. And while he was there, he hired a guide and said to this guide, I want to see things that no one else sees. So this guy took him up to a hill, and he said, I want you to look over that forest and tell me what you see. And he went, that's interesting, I can't see anything. And this guide pointed out a pyramid in the forest. He went, oh yeah, now I see it. And he said, look behind it. He said, oh look, there's 10 of them in a row. And he went, what's the chances of me going to see it? And so the guide said, oh look, for a little bit more American dollars, we'll go and have a browse at it. Anyway, he went down to this pyramid, and standing outside is a guard with the Guatemalan army. And he said, do you mind if I go inside? And he said, no, you can't. And he said, why is that? He said, well, the Japanese have basically given the Guatemalan government a large amount of money to study these pyramids. Well, life being what it is, he said to the guard, look, if I give you some American dollars, can I go in? And the guard said, yes, okay. So he went inside this pyramid. It wasn't a huge pyramid, but it was over the size of trees. Once inside, he said to me, there was another pyramid 1 metre away from the outside of the pyramid, that he could walk the whole way round. And he did. But it was so dark in there that he basically couldn't take any films of anything or whatever. But he just said that these pyramids must have done something, all being in a line, like a grid system, and they all now want to know what it's about. But back then, this is 20 years ago, back then, we hadn't discovered this energy source under the pyramids in Cairo at the moment, at that time. Now, we all want to know why. Yeah, that's so that from that moment, a lot of my friends started searching for things and giving me information, which I did. Basically, I just put the pieces together in my jigsaw puzzle, and I started making documentary movies on it, which are all attached to my website, ancientsymbolist.com. They're all free at the moment. Please feel free to go and watch them.
So when we've moved from England to Australia, we live in Sydney. In Sydney, what's the things that you found in terms of symbolisms that you found really interesting since you moved here? A lodge meeting for Freemasons?
For Freemasons, a lodge meeting for Freemasons.
So you joined Freemasonry when you got to Australia?
One day I'm at a lodge meeting, and this in Artarmon.
A lodge meeting for Freemasons?
For Freemasons, a lodge meeting for Freemasons.
So you joined Freemasonry when you got to Australia?
Yeah, I'll tell you how I did that. One day I was without work. I didn't have any work, and I'd only been over here a couple of years, so it was hard to get work for what I was looking for. And I was digging a trench in Vaucluse, and I was working for a company who hired me out, and that day I'm digging the dirt out of a trench that an excavator was digging. So he's digging the foundations of the building, and he wants someone to clean the trench out while he's doing his digging. And so that was me. I was digging out. I needed the money. I'll do anything for money at that time, and off I went. Anyway, lunchtime came around, and the excavator said to me, "What are you doing down there, son?" I said, "I'm in between things at the moment." "Okay, well, tell me what you're in between." I said, "I produced a book, and I've got a script that I want to get onto a film show or a film company." He said, "You need to meet people." And I went, "Yeah, I really do need to meet people. I know no one here." So he said, "Why don't you join Freemasonry?" I said, "Not really sure how you do that." He said, "Well, you just have to ask someone." He said, "My mate next door, he's a Freemason. He's actually the master of the lodge where we live. I'll have a chat with him and see what he can do for you." He said, "I'm a Freemason as well, but I haven't been for quite a few years." So I got to know his next door neighbour, and I joined that lodge, and I realised that I wasn't the only one with these not eccentric faults, but faults that you can...
Passions and interests.
Yeah, that are not normal. I mean, you can talk about rugby, sailing, golf, all those things. They're all in there, but my stuff wasn't normal. Mine was, I want to know what's going on and what it's all about. Anyway, in Freemasonry, there are lots of others who want to know what it's all about and how to achieve what you're looking for. Anyway, one day I'm at a different lodge, and this older Mason says to me, "Have you been to Egypt?" And I went, "No, I haven't, but I'd love to go. I'd love to see the Sphinx." He said, "You don't have to go to Egypt." He said, "All you got to go to is Ku-ring-gai National Park, down the end of Bobbin Head Road, and there's a war memorial down there, and in it is a Sphinx." So off I track. Next weekend I go to this war memorial, and I start videoing the Sphinx, and on it is a plaque saying it's exactly 1/16 the size of the one in Egypt, and it was made out of a large stone by a soldier who'd come back from the First World War, who had been gassed in the trenches and was diagnosed with tuberculosis. Well, when you get tuberculosis, they leave you outside on your veranda all night so that you can get fresh air. It's the only thing that cures it. And so they said to this, he's at Lady Davidson Hospital, which is only 2 minutes walk from the war memorial. I actually spent 2 weeks in it later on in life in Lady Davidson Hospital. Anyway, this guy come back from the war. His wife used to come and see him. She would have to stay outside the building, talk to him over a fence, but every day he would go down to the national park there, and he would carve out the stone this Sphinx. He then built 2 pyramids either side, and then the Admiralty put up a flag post from one of the ships that was one of their ships, the flag post they demounted, and they put it in front of this Sphinx. And on one day of the year, the summer solstice, the sun lines up with the flagpole and lines at 12 o'clock and goes perfectly down the middle of the Sphinx. And so from that moment on, this is all recorded there, God, that's an interesting thing that nobody knows about unless you talk to someone. From that moment on, I'm telling everybody about the Sphinx. And then I discover that there's a more important symbol, which is an obelisk in Hyde Park. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But really, this obelisk in Hyde Park become a marker that a group of people wanted to show something that's really important in Sydney. And I'll talk about that.
No, you go. You might as well go through it now. It sounds like it's interesting.
Okay, well, in the middle of Hyde Park is an obelisk. It's on the corner of Elizabeth and Bathurst Street. And the obelisk is 75 feet high, and it's 15 feet cubed at the bottom. And 15 feet is 5 plus 5 plus 5. Well, on one day of the year, the 21st of September, the sun lines up with this pyramid, which is on the top of the obelisk is a pyramid. It's a steel pyramid. It's got 4 circles in it. And on this day, the 21st of September, which is the spring equinox in Australia, when it's 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of night time, the sun lines up with 2 circles in this pyramid and treks along a path to a fountain. Now, the fountain's called the Fountain of Life by the City of Sydney Council. It then passes through the fountain, drinks from the fountain, and then rises up some steps leading to the grammar school. And then as the door opens at 5:55, the teachers in this grammar school would set their clocks for 5:55 every 21st of September since 1857 till now. It was their timepiece. So someone had put this obelisk and the Fountain of Life right in front of the school, and I then started checking this out. I filmed it 6 consecutive years in all different aspects to get a different angle on it, seeing if it was true or not. Anyway, always responded with the same following down the path to the fountain. And then I found out that the obelisk was built by the Mayor of Sydney at the time, George Thornton. He was also the Grand Master of the New South Wales Freemasons. So for the next 5-6 years, I would turn up there and other Masons would come along with me just to check it out. And I could then go talking about it at lodges, and someone would say, I've been there and I've seen that. It happens exactly as he says. And found out that Sydney Grammar School had their own Masonic lodges in it, of which past teachers and past pupils could all go to. And all of the schools in Sydney, they all had their own lodges as well. They've since amalgamated into one big lodge called the Schools Lodges of Sydney, and they all meet in the Masonic Centre. So from that moment on, I knew that someone wants to put this message around Sydney, how to tell the time, a specific time on a specific day. And it was this group of people who then put other messages around Sydney, which I discovered during my tours of Sydney, which I still do to this day, looking for a new message.
Different symbols and different messages.
Different symbols and different messages.
I think that's probably the most fascinating thing that I've found talking to you over the years, is just how interconnected all the different symbols are, and how most of them are in plain sight and we never realise they're there.
How I discovered also where the obelisk was I used to go to Customs House all the time, and Customs House is one big Masonic building with all symbolism in it. And just around the corner from Customs House is the original town square. Now, if you came in 1800s to Sydney, you would want to have a drink of water from somewhere. And so Sydney had its own pure town water at that time. And they had a fountain in the town square. It was called the Pavement. It's still there now, but there's no water in it. And it's right next door to the first obelisk that was built in Sydney, in Macquarie Place. It's called Macquarie Place. And it tells the distance from all the towns in Sydney to Bathurst and various other smaller towns that were around at the time. But on this pavement was a verse from the Bible, and it basically said, "Whoever drinks from this fountain shall forever thirst again. But whoever drinks from the water that I shall give will no longer thirst." And so I'm looking and thinking, well, what does that mean? It actually meant if you could get yourself to the fountain of life and understand what it was talking about, then you wouldn't thirst again. Your thirst will be quenched by this fountain of life. And so I then found this obelisk, and then I found the fountain of life. And then I realised that the obelisk is really just a marker. And one of my friends, a Masonic friend, knew someone on the water board. Now, the water board control the obelisk on the corner of Elizabeth Street. They used to have it as a vent for all the smells coming out of the sewers, and so they called it Thornton's scent bottle, because at the very top where the pyramid was, these 4 circles allowed the stench to come out of the drains all around Sydney and then disperse high up in the sky. So the water board had it as one of their buildings that they had to maintain. Anyway, I contacted the water board, and along with my friend went with the water board into the actual obelisk. It's got some steps going down where it then passes into the tunnels under Sydney. At the bottom of the steps was a black and white Masonic pavement. Now, I knew that the pavement that's in the town square is a black and white pavement. Black and white pavements are in every Masonic lodge. This is where all of the work occurs. But lots of buildings in Sydney all have a black and white square as you enter the building. St James's Church on the edge of Hyde Park, you can't get into the church unless you walk on the black and white floor. So they're putting this message all around Sydney. But only if you know will you find it.
So Freemasonry built lots of Sydney.
Oh, it's full up. What they've created basically for people to look at and wonder, because unless someone gives you the key, you're just going to walk straight past it. One building, as you leave, walk along Macquarie Street, is called the British Medical Association. And on the outside walls is some Knights Templars. They're holding a shield, and on the shield is a sword, and around the sword is a serpent, which is the symbol for medicine. But as you walk into the building, they haven't got a black and white floor. They've got a green and white floor, because they're into nature and curing people. And so different places want to show you the message, but you need to first of all discover the message, which I did joining Freemasonry, because I'd had a lot of insight prior to that. Suddenly I joined Freemason and I'm at home. I walk into the lodge one night and I'm at home. My first night in the lodge, I sit down afterwards, and as I sit down, 2 Masons come and sit next to me, and they start talking to me, and they introduce themselves. One of them is a Catholic liberal minister, okay, and the other one is an Anglican minister. And my first words to them, as I'd read the Bible umpteen times, what don't you get from your organisation that you get from this organisation? And they said, it's taken us years to find that out, and it's going to take you years to find that out. Well, because I went out talking about symbolism in various lodges for 10, 15 years, I got real lots of information quickly. I couldn't get enough of it. And from that moment on, symbols have been coming at me 100 miles an hour. I just have to walk down the street and I think, why me?
Well, I think that's definitely one of the positives, I think, of Freemasonry, is it brings people together from all walks of life, and like-minded people from the sounds of it.
There's not many places where you could go and talk about different things. And as long as you don't talk about religion or politics, everything's on the table, which basically brings everything into play.
Now, I know that you're a big fan of both Bruce Caffey and Graham Hancock, who's obviously, Graham Hancock's obviously become quite huge over the last couple of years with his Netflix documentaries that have exploded. But Bruce Caffey, one of the original people to talk about energy lines. I know that you have a real interesting take on energy lines, and obviously now with some of the discoveries in Egypt as well, and some of the other places, there's become much more to the fore. But you've been researching this for 20 plus years.
Yeah, what happened was that when I got sick and lost my arm, I had like 2 years off from work. Only because I had to get my balance back and do all sorts of things. And that 2 years allowed me to read a lot and study a lot. And I picked up two books that I'd had in my bookshelf for ages. One was called The Harmonic Conquest of Space, and the other one was called A Bridge to Infinity. Well, in these two books, this Bruce Caffey was a New Zealand air pilot. He'd basically discovered where energy lines were all around the world, and he was giving talks on them to people who would like to listen. And he basically discovered that most of the Indian temples that were put there 4,000 years ago were all on these energy lines. He also discovered that Windsor Castle was also on an energy line, where the Queen resides every weekend, or used to. Prior to the Queen owning it, the Normans came and took it, but they overcome the Saxons, who had it as a fort before them. So lots of people have known where these energy lines were for thousands of years, not hundreds of years. All over Europe, they call them ley lines. Anyway, while I'm sick, I'm reading these Bruce Caffey books, and I purchased one of their software packages where you could determine by yourself, if you know the latitude and longitude of a particular place, then you could tap into their website and go through Google Earth and see if it was on an energy line. Well, I bought one of their software packages. It wasn't expensive, but it wasn't compatible with my Apple Mac at the time. So I contacted the company and I said, is there an energy line passing anywhere through Sydney? Anyway, the next thing I know, they do a Google Earth map and send it to me. And in it, this Google Earth map has a line going through Hyde Park, through the Fountain of Life, but it passes through St Mary's Cathedral first, and it passes along by the Botanical Gardens through the Domain. So it was at an angle, but it was going straight through St Mary's, the Fountain of Life, just to the side of the War Memorial, and then straight along the road past Redfern and other places. And I then realised that not only did the Masons want to measure time on this perfect day of the year, the spring equinox, they also wanted to tell you where the energy lines were. And so I then purchased a normal computer and started putting their software packages in it myself, and then searching places around the planet and see if they were on an energy line. And the most important one I found was the Arc de Triomphe in France. And I then went to France for a holiday, and I walked past the Louvre.
A holiday disguised.
A holiday disguised. And I think you was with me at the time.
Yeah.
You was with me at the time, and I was getting myself into all sorts of trouble. But we're passing the Louvre, and the Louvre is this fantastic museum with this beautiful mirrored pyramid outside it. And as you walk past the Louvre, all you can see is this huge obelisk, which is one of the 3 Cleopatra's Needles taken from Egypt. And underneath the Cleopatra's Needle along the Louvre, the Champs-Élysées, is a large water fountain where kids are playing in it and people are just enjoying the moment. And directly behind it is the Arc de Triomphe. Now, most of these obelisks all refer to sites where fallen soldiers have been. And so the Arc de Triomphe was a massive site to commemorate all of the fallen soldiers in the First and Second World War. But they put it on an energy line, and they put the Cleopatra's Needle in front of it to indicate where it was. And from that moment on, gee, this is interesting. This is getting really out there. And I then I study this website, Map the World Grid, with Grid Point Atlas. And they've got various, but the authors of it put various sites on it that were all on these lines. One of them was the Statue of Liberty in America, and one of them was the Washington headquarters for their Masonic buildings, along with Angkor Wat and various temples in Egypt and in India. And they started to put down places where they're experimenting with, like CERN, experimenting with astrophysics, where they're also harnessing the energy from the Earth. And then on this site, I looked for their original energy line, and it's in Babylon. At exactly 33 degrees north of the equator is the city of Babylon, where they built a tower that was to reach to heaven. And I realised that they wasn't just building a tower that reached to heaven. It wasn't just two bricks, one on top of the other. They were building something that could reach to heaven. For some reason, this offended a deity, and this deity, we will say, come down to earth and stop the builders, scatter them all around the earth and give them 72 different languages, so they could never build another tower that reached to heaven. Unfortunately, the only language that the deity couldn't confound was symbolism. They all mean exactly the same from day one to today. And so it doesn't matter what language you talk, a symbol can represent whatever you're talking about. And so from that moment on, the people who built that tower, and I'm going to call them masons, because the builder of the tower was called Nimrod. And this is in the Bible, he turns around and says, I'm going to ask all of the masons from the surrounding countries to come and help me build a tower that reaches to heaven. I don't say that. That's what it says in the Bible. And so these masons, once dissipated around the world, took with them their custodianship of symbols. And from that moment on, I'm like, I want to know all about the symbols. Now, I then contact this Map the World Grid to see where other energy lines were. And the author of the grid, the guy who created the software, turns around and says to me, Cape Canaveral is on 3 interjoining energy lines. So I knew that whoever the Americans had got their information from, they also want to put their space station on these energy lines. And from that moment on, I'm like, gee, there's a lot more in this than...
Too much to be a coincidence.
Much too much to be a coincidence. Yeah, so there's more to this in a minute when you...
I think in terms of, I mean, the energy lines are fascinating and what they can do. I think in terms of what you touched on there with the symbolism, and from Freemasonry and seeing the symbolism from, like you said, it started off in Babylon and then spread over the world. When you're seeing all these different symbols that are on buildings or on all different things around Sydney, around London, France, everywhere, how are you then trying to relate them back and connect them into different areas and different parts of history?
To me, it's all part of a jigsaw puzzle. And the jigsaw puzzle will, at the end of the day, all come together. There is a reason for everything. It's all been mapped out so that we all understand where we're going. And I just think one day it's a return to the stars. A return to the stars. Now, we would like to know where to go. If anything, if another tsunami, which is what happened with Noah and the flood, Nimrod was Noah's grandson. Okay, so this is where it gets interesting. Noah lived after the flood 350 years. He had a grandson called Nimrod. Nimrod would have gone to see Noah and said, look, tell me what it was like prior to the flood. What it was like dealing with the antediluvians, because that's what they called them. Now Noah turned around and said to him, well, my deity was coming and going. Oh yeah? Where? How? And so Noah would have instructed Nimrod how to build this tower. And yeah, that's where I've come from that. So I've decided that in my little way, we're going back to the stars, but we don't know where this 12th planet is, how we can communicate with it, if we could ever get there, whether we could ever exchange some of the commodities on Earth for some of the ingredients for the Tree of Life. That was what my first film script was. I'll give you some of our commodities here if you give me an ingredient from the Tree of Life to give us longevity. Because if Noah lived 950 years, but we as mankind have only been designated between 70 and 120, I want longer. How do I get it? I need to talk to someone who's been here and done that. Now, my next story that I've put together is that while I'm in Freemasonry, I go into other orders, and not too far. I don't want to swamp myself with going out too many nights in a year. But one of the orders I joined was the next one on from the craft, what we call the craft, and this is called the Red Lodge, or the Royal Arch. And in it, there's, say, 13 degrees. And in 2 of those degrees, they give an explanation of the Ark of the Covenant. And they put a replica on the altar. Now, I, in my wisdom, have decided that I'm going to give the ritual to talk about the Ark of the Covenant. And so every time there was a candidate coming in for those degrees, I would give the ritual to the candidate on the Ark of the Covenant. That's a big statement, but it's out there. Nothing's a secret regarding that. In the lodges in England, they have an ark on the altar as well, or on the table, and they've just done an open day to explain what it's there for. In the Grand Lodge of England, they've got 4 walls. On one of the walls is the biggest Ark of the Covenant you've ever seen. And the whole reason the temple was built by King Solomon was to house the Ark of the Covenant. Now, in this ritual, I explain that King Solomon was so worried that someone would come and steal his ark, which was called the Glory of Israel, that he had a replica built. And he placed that replica in a secret vault underneath the temple. Only the high priest and a few people knew about that Ark of the Covenant that he had replicated. What happened was when King Solomon died, his son, who was born from the marriage to the Queen of Sheba, came from Ethiopia to Jerusalem to pay his respects to his father's death. He then took one of the arks back to Ethiopia, where it now resides, in a small temple, in a small chapel, behind a church called St. Mary of Zion, and it's been in this chapel for 3,000 years. Now, the strangest thing was this company mapped the world grid with Gridpoint Atlas. The author of it sent me a energy line passing through Ethiopia, through the Church of St. Mary of Zion, and through this small temple or chapel which housed the Ark of the Covenant. I then realised that the Ark of the Covenant also needs to be on an energy line. And it is to this very day. So there's one Ark of the Covenant in Ethiopia. The one that was underneath in the secret vault of King Solomon wasn't discovered until the Crusaders went back to Jerusalem in search of the Ark of the Covenant. They knew, well, the next part of our story, is they knew that the Ark of the Covenant was in a secret vault that was, when the temple was destroyed by the Romans, no one knew about the secret vault until 1100 years later, when the Crusaders, who knew exactly where it was, went there. Their sole purpose was to obtain the Ark of the Covenant, which they did. They took it back to France, and I now believe it's in America. Me personally believe it's in America with the people who took it there. And so there's 3 arks, one in Ethiopia, one which the Crusaders took to America, and one on board the cloud, where the deity speaks to us at any time, whenever we choose to. Now, the other part of this ritual, when I'm talking about what it's, I explain what it's made from, what its purpose was, and then I basically say that it was an oracle. And if you asked it a question, it would reply with the answer. Wow. Now, this ritual is over 200 years old, longer than 200 years. If you ask something today,
like our Google or ChatGPT
or Siri,
yep,
it would explain, turn right here, go there. Now, this was a box built 3,500 years ago, which could reply with the correct answer. An oracle. Now, I'm telling that to the candidate. Now, I'm told, on my first night in the lodge, that everything in Freemasonry is true. They have a library better than any other library in the world, in England. They have this library that's better than any other library in the world. Now, they wouldn't put this together in their ritual if they didn't believe it. There's nothing they want to talk. All they want to talk about is the truth. How do you get the truth? Well, they've had it for umpteen centuries, and they let you find it out. But it's never coming to you all on the same night. You've got to work your way up.
Yeah, it's different stages.
Yeah, you don't get it all at once.
Different degrees. The different degrees are different stages of knowledge that you get to access.
But I do put this, I have made a documentary on the Ark of the Covenant, which is on my website, where I explain this, and I didn't put it there. All I explain is this is where it is, this is where you can find it, take it on board.
So moving on from the Ark, which we could talk about for ages, and energy lines, which I think from what we've discovered, just that brief chat, are just the important different locations around the world that are aligned to the energy lines just cannot be a coincidence. You're also working on something new at the moment. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I came away from making a film about Indiana Jones because it could be done in a different way. And I've had all this knowledge, and I've been travelling to churches all around Europe and Australia and Asia for a long time. And each time I go into one, I find new stuff. Well, I've come to the conclusion that the people who built the churches have used Jesus as the messenger. Because you can take me to any church, you can blindfold me, you can take the blindfold off, and I'll tell you what number church is that is in Freemasonry, whether it's a first degree, a second degree, a third degree, a Royal Arch degree, right up to 18th. I didn't put it there, but I can tell you which one is. And so I then see Jesus doing all of this symbolism. And my symbol for my website, ancientsymbolist.com, there is a clamshell. Now, in every church, you'll see John the Baptist baptizing Jesus with a clamshell. And what the clamshell means or represents is that on one side of the clamshell is the longest day. On the other side of the clamshell is the shortest day. And exactly in the middle of the clamshell is the equinox, where it's 12 hours a night and 12 hours a daytime. And so they could put the clamshell on the beach. I could watch the sun coming up on the longest day. It would be one end of the clamshell. And as I followed the sun every day and just marked a line to mark it along, I would get to the other end of the clamshell and it would be the shortest day. So they could tell time, longest and shortest days, by the clamshell. Now, the clamshell's on nearly every building in Sydney.
Yeah.
Own.
I didn't realise it was there until you told me, and then I could see it everywhere every time I look.
If you was to go to St James's Church, it's called the Church of the Shell. because St. James, it was his symbol, the shell. If you go to St. James's station, it's on the station. It's on most of the buildings, large buildings in Sydney. So somebody wants you to know. Now, John the Baptist, I believe, initiated Jesus into this mystery school. And from that moment on, Jesus has become the messenger for everything that they want us to see. I don't say that. I can just show you Jesus with that symbol in a church in Sydney. I didn't put it there, but someone wants you to see it. That someone is the builders of these churches. And it will be there when we're all gone. And maybe the next generation will see it. So my film is about John the Baptist.
And John the Baptist, obviously, you hear about the apostles, you hear about Jesus. He doesn't get as much coverage outside of potentially pure churchgoers.
Most of the churches you can go to are named after John the Baptist. They're Baptist churches. Lots of schools are named after John the Baptist. He's really the instigator of the knowledge. He's the patron saint of Freemasonry. His day is the 22nd of June, the summer solstice in the Northern Hemisphere. John the Evangelist is the patron saint of the shortest day of the year, the 22nd of December. So one sits at one end of the clamshell and one sits at the other, marking the longest and shortest days. Now, I didn't put them there. In England, normally the Master of the Lodge is made on St. John's Day. He's elevated to the Master of the Lodge on St. John's Day. So they all know over there what it's about. Now, when Jesus was initiated and taught in this mystery school that John took him into, from that day on, Jesus became the messenger. And so, like I said, you can take me to any church and I'll show you all the Masonic stuff in the church. And I can tell you why it's there. Because they want you to know how it all works. It's a big statement, but one that I'm going to give you irrefutable evidence that I didn't give or put somewhere. I'm just going to show you it. You can make up your own mind whether it's true or false. It's all true because I know what the people want you to see. Normally, imagine Jesus is always shown with two keys in his hand. Two keys.
Why is that?
To operate the Ark of the Covenant, there are two small keys. They're fitted into the breastplate of the high priest. They're called the Urim and the Thummim. They're two small crystals that need to be used to operate the Ark of the Covenant. They're only placed in the high priest's breastplate. How do I know that? I do the ritual in Freemasonry on it. So I know that these two keys, the Urim and the Thummim, operate the Ark of the Covenant, and they're only in the breastplate of the high priest, who is the only one who can speak to the deity on a certain day, the spring equinox. The spring equinox is the day of atonement at one mint, when it's 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of night time. That was the Passover day, when the sun passed over a marker where everybody in Israel came to Jerusalem to pay their taxes. On that day, they paid their taxes and had a Passover feast. That was what the Passover feast was all about. You come and pay your taxes. The taxes that they paid kept the army and allowed nobody else to steal their glory of Israel, the Ark. So we needed the taxes to pay the army. You arrived in Jerusalem on the Passover day, the spring equinox. You paid your taxes and then went back. All this is just part of history, really, but it's all tied in.
Well, I can't wait to see that one get made, hopefully, into something really great. On the last part before we have to wrap up, because we could talk about this for ages, and I think we're going to do that and talk about all these topics in a lot more detail in the future. In the script, because I've read it, you mentioned the link all the way from John the Baptist and before that Solomon, and all the way through to modern day royalty. Can you talk to a little bit more about how that link is
Okay,
kind of
well,
built?
look, you can only become a king and queen of Europe if you can trace your family line back to King David. Because when the deity said to David, I want you to build me a temple to house the Ark of the Covenant, he said to him, if you do that, your seed will rule over my people forever. It's all written exactly like that. I put it in one of my films. And so you have to trace your line back to King David. And so I've got a genealogy line, and it's out there from Adam and Eve to the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth, and everybody in between, and how she got there. So the royal family of England could trace their family line back to King David. However, their bloodline is not totally pure. And so my story or my script talks about another bloodline, one that comes through Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Now, not many people want to hear this, that Jesus was married. Jesus was a rabbi. To be a rabbi, you had to be married. Once you were married, you were told to have children, go forth and multiply. Well, Jesus married Mary Magdalene. How do I know that? I've got a mosaic window image from Cologne Cathedral where Jesus is planting a ring on Mary Magdalene's hand. I didn't put it there, but I'm just telling you I know it's Jesus. No one could say it's not Jesus. Mary Magdalene's face has been eradicated. It's been scrubbed out. Everybody else in the scene is still in there, except for hers. Why? Because they want to debunk this story. We're married, and that when Jesus was no longer on the scene, Mary came to France, to a place called Marseille. Marseille means where Mary sailed to. And so at Marseille, they have these temples dedicated to Mary Magdalene. And for hundreds of years, they believed that Mary Magdalene was married to Jesus and that her children could be in line, the line of David, to rule over France. And so they integrated with all of the royal families of France, and they called them the Merovingian kings, Merovingian kings of France. Their symbol was the fleur-de-lis, because King Solomon, when he married the Queen of Sheba, her symbol was the fleur-de-lis, the flower of the lily. And so the lily became the symbol of all the royal houses. It also became the symbol of lots of royal families in England. And so Mary Magdalene adopted this symbol of the fleur-de-lis and also the clamshell. And so all of her family line used the clamshell and the fleur-de-lis to marry into more fleur-de-lises and more clamshells. And what happened was when Queen Victoria came onto the throne, she was from a German origin. And so the English were not quite okay with all this. And then when we went to war with Germany twice, it looked as if they had a hold on England. And so Winston Churchill turned around and said to King George, I think one of your offsprings have got to marry into royal blood, the bloodline of England. Winston Churchill's family bloodline was the fleur-de-lis. His symbol, he was called Winston Churchill Randall Spencer. His symbol was also the clamshell. He had a family member, Princess Diana Spencer, whose family symbol is 3 clamshells. And so King Charles, or Prince Charles at the time, his symbol was 3 feathers. And so he was told to marry someone who had 3 clamshells. He didn't want to marry her. He had his own woman he wanted to marry. But he was told to bring more royal blood into the English aristocracy and the royal family. And so he had to marry Diana Spencer. And he did, brought 2 children. Prince William now has his own emblem, and in the middle of his emblem is a red clamshell, denoting his royal bloodline, going back through Princess Diana, back through the Spencers, and back through. What I've also got is I've got an image of Mary Magdalene in a church in England, and above her head is a clamshell. I don't know why it's there. I do know why it's there, because her symbol is the clamshell. And my film is all about, from John the Baptist and his clamshell. This is the film I want to get made. He's bringing the clamshell back 2,000 years ago, which now comes into the royal family of England today. I didn't put it there. Someone wants us to know. All I am is just someone who's got the message. Whether the message is what everybody wants to hear, it doesn't matter. It's going to come out. It's just how long it takes to get out. I've been doing it a long time. It's going to come out. Maybe this podcast helps it to come out. Maybe my film getting made over in America will help it to get made. I don't know. I'm hoping so.
Well, let's hope it does. Well, I think that's all we got time for today. Dad, it's been a pleasure to chat to you. Hopefully we can do this again with the King Seal podcast. If you do want to find out more, do go to theancientsymbolist.com, and we will definitely be having another chat, and we'll definitely pick a couple more topics to dive deeper into in the coming future.
Thanks, Thad. Thanks for asking me the questions that seem most relevant. Well done.
Appreciate it.